All right, guys, welcome in. With the New Year's 6 bowl games fast approaching, I figured we would go back and look at the full New Year's 6 history with all of the games starting in 2014. I really like these New Year's 6 bowl games. It's kind of a shame they've become almost, some of them at least have become almost meaningless with all of the opt-outs and stuff like that. It's kind of a cool little exclusive club to be a part of. And looking at the history, this was started back when the playoff was expanded, the 14 playoff, 2014 to now. And then, of course, the playoff will be expanded again. You can take a look. ESPN exclusive for all of the New Year's 6 games, I believe. So I guess that means there hasn't been a single New Year's 6 game on any other network outside of ESPN. The most New Year's 6 appearances. So, guys, that is wrong. Alabama actually missed the New Year's 6 back in 2019 when they faced Michigan in the Citrus Bowl. Ohio State has the most New Year's 6 appearances. So if someone wants to go on Wikipedia and edit that, I am IP banned by Wikipedia, so I cannot edit it. But if someone wants to go edit it, it actually is Ohio State. Bama has the most wins. Bama has the most championships. Those are correct. And then it's completely owned by the SEC. And for people that maybe aren't totally familiar with college football, the reason the SEC is going to own all these type of stats when it comes to like national championships, playoff wins, stuff like that, the states that they're located in are the most talent-rich states, so it's the easiest for them to recruit and things like that in the South. But you take a look at the last championship game. Georgia is the current champion. They are trying to repeat, of course. But let's go all the way back to 2014. And the first ever New Year's 6 game was the shellacking, the TCU win over Ole Miss, 42-3, and then everyone claimed that TCU should have made the playoff. How about Boise State? That's Boise State's only time being in the New Year's 6 bowls. They beat Arizona in what is kind of an irrelevant game. I barely remember. I don't even remember it existing, but I do remember Boise State playing in the Fiesta Bowl. Remember that trick play they had against Oklahoma? And here they are again. They beat Arizona 38-30. Georgia Tech beats Mississippi State and Dak Prescott in Miami 49-34. Wow, Georgia Tech made a New Year's 6 bowl. Michigan State with that crazy comeback over Baylor. I remember midway through the third quarter, and Baylor was crushing MSU, and everyone was like, Baylor should have made the playoff. And then Michigan State and Connor Cook had the crazy comeback. Oregon annihilates a totally fraudulent Florida State team. It's such a shame. Like, they couldn't keep Florida State out of the playoff, but it was the most obvious thing ever that once Florida State faced equal talent, they would get crushed. They were not good that year. Jameis was a turnover machine, but they were 13-0. They were the defending national champions, so you had to put them in the playoff. They get annihilated in the Rose Bowl. And then, of course, Ohio State beating Alabama, the epic Ezekiel Elliott, 85-yard touchdown run to win that game. Cardale Jones, the third stringer. I remember that game. Derrick Henry, that was like the first time I remember seeing Derrick Henry. Alabama was up by like 2 touchdowns midway through the second quarter. I thought Ohio State was going to get crushed. And then the national championship game, Ohio State destroys Oregon. Zeke Elliott has like 250 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. Oregon actually entered this game 6.5-point favorites, and the Buckeyes take home the first New Year's 6 season national title. Moving on to, it's going to be tough to number the year because these games are taking place in both 2015 and 2016, but this is the 2015 season. How about Houston making one? Yes, they finished 12-1. They beat Florida State. I think that was the last Florida State New Year's 6 appearance. They lose that game 38-24. Oh yeah, the Georgia Dome, right. That was one of those irrelevant New Year's 6 games. Clemson beating Oklahoma in the 1v4 game. I remember, what was that, Deshaun Watson versus Baker? That's what it had to have been. And then Baker ended up winning the Heisman the next year, or maybe the year after next year. I don't remember exactly. But that game was kind of really not competitive. The Clemson-Oklahoma game in Miami. And then Alabama destroys Michigan State 38-0. Of course, Michigan State getting in over Ohio State because they beat Ohio State 17-13 or whatever it is in the rain-soaked game. Oh no, it was 17-14 because they won on a walk-off 45-yard field goal. Crazy. Ohio State ends up going to the Fiesta Bowl with that stacked 2015 team and beating Notre Dame easily. Joey Bosa got ejected in this game midway through the second quarter. I think Zeke had like maybe 230 yards and 3 touchdowns or 4 touchdowns, something like that. The Christian McCaffrey Stanford team annihilates Iowa. So Iowa made it at 12-1. Iowa was 12-0 against MSU in the Big Ten championship game. They could have made the playoff, but Michigan State beat them in a low-scoring game, and then they get crushed by Christian McCaffrey and Stanford, and that's when everyone thought McCaffrey should have won the Heisman. Ole Miss destroys Oklahoma State. I do not remember a single thing about that game. Was that the Bo Wallace team? I have no clue. Alabama ends up beating Clemson in the epic national title. That kind of begins the whole Alabama-Clemson rivalry for the playoff. I believe that was the game where Nick Saban did the pooch onside kick. Kenyon Drake had a kickoff return for a touchdown. I believe that's that game. Moving on to the 2016 season. Oh no, Florida State did make another New Year's Six Bowl. That was my bad. They end up beating Michigan. That was the Dalvin Cook team going up against the Jabril Peppers team. That 2016 team for Michigan. That was the game Jake Butt, unfortunately, tore his ACL or something and really ruined his draft stock. Alabama beats Washington in one of the more irrelevant non-competitive games. So I remember looking back on this game, and Alabama had 50 rush attempts to 13 pass attempts in that game. That was with Jalen Hurts. Clemson, the 31-0 win over Ohio State. So it really was just the combination of everything. Ohio State, the horrible play calling, JT Barrett not being able to throw. Deshaun Watson was not even that good in this game. He had 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, but because Ohio State's offense just could not do anything, they lose 31-0. Western Michigan, a MAC team, makes the New Year's Six game. The Corey Davis Western Michigan team. Wisconsin ends up winning that game, taking place at the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, the Cotton Bowl. Boring game, 24-16. USC beats Penn State in one of the more epic Rose Bowls in recent memory, 52-49. The Sam Darnold versus Saquon Barkley game. Trace McSorley had a good game as well. Chris Godwin had a crazy touchdown. I remember the sun was beautiful that game, the sunset for the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. The Sugar Bowl, Oklahoma trounced Auburn. I remember this game, and it was a total mismatch. So this was an Oklahoma team that they lost 2 of their first 3 games. So they lost week 1 to Houston. Then they won week 2. Then they lost week 3 at home to Ohio State. That game with the Noah Brown catch, if you guys remember, JT Barrett had 4 passing touchdowns in the first half. Jerome Baker had a pick 6. And they end up going on a warpath. They finished 10-2, and it was just a mismatch. That was Baker Mayfield, D.D. Westbrook, Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, just trouncing Auburn. And then Clemson gets their revenge on Alabama 35-31. The Hunter Renfrow 2-yard touchdown to win it with 3 seconds left. That game at the Tampa Bay Falcons Stadium. The 2017 season, you had the Cotton Bowl, another really irrelevant game. Ohio State winning 24-7. Both of these teams were shut out throughout the entire second half. So the halftime score was 24-7, and that was the final score. Totally irrelevant game, very forgettable. Sam Darnold really had no help on offense, and Ohio State with JT Barrett was really just a shell of themselves. They finish at 12-2 that year. Penn State beat Washington 35-28. So this game was not as close as the score indicated. I believe at one point Penn State was up 28-7. Saquon Barkley had an 80-yard rushing touchdown. Was that the year Saquon Barkley got drafted? Could you imagine Saquon Barkley? I don't know if that was the year he got drafted, but that's great that he played in the actual New Year's Six game, because most guys now would just opt out. Wisconsin beats Miami. Remember Miami making a New Year's Six game? Remember when Miami was number 2 in the nation? They played on the road at Pittsburgh and lost in like 20-degree weather, like on Black Friday or something. Wisconsin wins this game 34-24. That was literally the home field advantage for Miami, and they lose to Wisconsin. That was a Jonathan Taylor team, I'm guessing, maybe when he was a freshman. UCF finishes undefeated, 12-0. They beat Auburn 34-27. You know, this is part of the reason we need the 12-team playoff. I am certainly not someone that thinks UCF should have been national champions, but they are a group of 5 team that did go undefeated, so, you know, we certainly have to respect them for doing that, but no, they were not national champions that year. You had Georgia. This was the Rose Bowl, another unbelievable Rose Bowl. This was the Nick Chubb, Sony Michel duel game going up against Baker Mayfield. Oklahoma, to me, I remember watching this game, and it had a vibe that Oklahoma was always in control, but Georgia kept it close enough. They kept responding, and they win in double overtime, 54-48. In that one, this game, Alabama as the 4 seed beats Clemson 24-6. That game was a snooze fest. Jalen Hurts started that game for Alabama, played the entire game. Tua was backing him up. And then for Clemson, who was Clemson's quarterback? Oh my goodness. The dude that got benched for Trevor Lawrence the next season. I'm not going to look it up. It is what it is. But Alabama wins that game 24-6. And then they end up beating Georgia 26-23. They go with Tua in the second half. They're getting shut out in the first half. Jalen Hurts goes to the bench. Tua comes back. The long touchdown on 2nd and 26 or whatever it is in overtime, and they win 26-23 in the All-SEC championship there. Moving to 2018, you had Florida defeating Michigan 41-15, another irrelevant game. I don't even remember, did Michigan start Wilton Spade in this game or O'Korn? I don't even remember that Michigan team. I really don't even remember that Florida team either. Clemson beats Notre Dame 30-3, just completely uncompetitive. Trevor Lawrence, I believe this game Clemson was up 30-3 like midway through the third quarter and just legitimately stopped trying because it was a semifinal game and they wanted to keep their guys healthy. Alabama beats Oklahoma 45-34. That was the Kyler Murray Oklahoma team, and that was the game where Alabama, if I'm remembering correctly, they were up 28-0 at the end of the first quarter. It was either 28-0 or 21-0, and Oklahoma did a good job not to get completely annihilated, and they made the score look decent, but that was not a close game. LSU, Joe Burrow's first really big game. They beat UCF. UCF was 12-0 again, and they didn't make the playoff. They won 40-32. I remember Joe Burrow throwing a pick six in this game, coming back, and that was really like the rise of Joe Burrow. We know what happened in 2019. Of course, he won the Heisman, and they just had a crazy offense, and they won the national title. The Rose Bowl, Ohio State, really kind of disappointing season for them. They end up losing to Purdue, getting blown out. They finished 12-1. They win the Big Ten, and then they beat Washington. That was the Dwayne Haskins team. And then for Washington, that was Jake Browning's last year, if I remember correctly. Texas beats Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. That was we're back. If you're at the end of that game, Texas ends up winning that game 28-21. Georgia, it just seemed like they really weren't motivated, but that is every SEC team's excuse if we're being honest. And then the national title game, Clemson annihilating Alabama. This was the height of Clemson's mini dynasty. And I think it is fair to call what Clemson had a mini dynasty. This was the absolute height of it. They blow out Alabama. 2 14-0 teams. Clemson goes to 15-0. Tua, I remember he threw a pick six. Trevor Lawrence was going crazy when he was a true freshman. We all thought this was going to be a crazy dominant run for Clemson. This was the height of their mini dynasty right after they won this game. That was the absolute height of it. Moving to 2019, you had Penn State over Memphis. This was the Micah Parsons breakout game, and unfortunately for Penn State, this was Micah Parsons' last game. He sits out 2020, and then he gets picked 12th overall, and we know he's been tearing up the NFL. Really high-scoring game there. Also, Journey Brown's last game. The young running back that a lot of people forget, he was a beast on Penn State. He had some type of medical issue or health issue, unfortunately, and he had to medically retire, if I remember correctly. LSU just annihilates Oklahoma. They had 49 points in the first half. Joe Burrow had 7 passing touchdowns. Justin Jefferson had 200 yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. They crush Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley. That was the Jalen Hurts team when Jalen Hurts transferred there for 1 year. Clemson beating Ohio State. Oh my God, this game. You know, whether or not you're an Ohio State fan, that there's just no way. I mean, if Clemson and Ohio State in 2019 faced off 10 times on a neutral field, Ohio State would have won 9 of them. That was the one time, just the way the game went. Ohio State settled for 2 field goals early on in the red zone when they shouldn't have. And Ohio State was up 13-0 with 4 minutes left in the second quarter. Shaun Wade sacks Trevor Lawrence. They're about to punt. Nope, it's targeting. He gets ejected. Wow. I mean, that Ohio State team with Jeff Okudah, Chase Young, Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, Garrett Wilson as a true freshman. Oh, man. Chris Olave. That was a tough one for Ohio State. The Orange Bowl, Florida beats Virginia. That's kind of another irrelevant New Year's Six bowl. They win that game. Florida's been in a lot of irrelevant New Year's Six games, if we're being honest. Virginia made it at 9-4 in the ACC. The Rose Bowl, Oregon beats Wisconsin 28-27. So a good old-fashioned Rose Bowl. That was the Justin Herbert win. Good game there. And then you had the Sugar Bowl. Georgia was in the Sugar Bowl a ton. Georgia beating Baylor 26-14. Really boring game. The Sugar Bowl being at 8 o'clock, like the last game, it really takes the sting out of the Superdome. It just feels irrelevant. And then the national title, LSU was just a power keg. They were a juggernaut. You're not beating them. Clemson was just standing in their way, and they got run over. They lost 42-25. LSU that season was ridiculous. Also, it helps playing in New Orleans, Louisiana. Holy crap. In 2020, so here it is. This is the pandemic season. Oklahoma beating Florida. Basically, all of Florida's team opted out except for Kyle Trask. Completely uncompetitive game. This was Spencer Rattler's breakout game, and in the offseason, everyone was predicting him to win the Heisman and be the number 1 overall pick. Georgia beating Cincinnati 24-21. Cincinnati was leading this entire game. I think Georgia won it on like a 60-yard field goal or something. Georgia finishes 7-2. Alabama with Mac Jones, Devontae Smith winning the Heisman over Notre Dame 31-14, totally uncompetitive. Ohio State crushing Clemson in the Superdome 49-28. Justin Fields getting injured that game, taking that hard hit on the run. He threw like 3 bombs that game. One of them was to Jameson Williams, I remember. Texas A&M beating North Carolina 41-27. That was kind of an irrelevant. I really don't remember that game for some reason. You had Iowa State beating Oregon 34-17. How about Oregon making a New Year's Six game at 4-2 because of the pandemic? And then Alabama trouncing Ohio State. Just the total scheming mismatch. Ohio State's defensive coordinator completely outclassed Alabama. I remember Trey Sherman getting injured on the first play of the game. He had 1 carry. That was it. And he was on a good run, like a crazy run, but it was not even close. The Ohio State's defense got destroyed by Mac Jones. 2021, you had Michigan State beating Pittsburgh. Kenneth Walker opting out. Kenny Pickett opting out. Why even play the game? It's so stupid. Alabama beating Cincinnati. We respect Cincinnati for making it there, but that game was not competitive. Georgia beating Michigan, another game that was just not competitive at all. Georgia had way better athletes. Oklahoma beats Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl 37-35. Crazy game. Notre Dame was winning it. Marcus Freeman's debut, and they completely blow that game late. The Rose Bowl, Ohio State beats Utah. C.J. Stroud had one of the most efficient passing performance ever measured in college football history. JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba, like 320 receiving yards or something. And Ohio State beats Utah. Well, Ohio State just had a terrible defense last year, 48-45. Utah really played well on offense. Baylor beats Ole Miss in another snooze fest Sugar Bowl, 21-7. You know, that was the game Matt Corral got hurt really early. He had that bad injury early on. Baylor ends up winning. And then Georgia beats Alabama in the All-SEC National Championship taking place in Indianapolis. 33-18, they end up getting a national title there. And then this year, you can take a look at the overall schedule that is up. You've got Tennessee, Clemson in a fun Orange Bowl. I think Clemson wins that game. Alabama, Kansas State. We'll see who sits out for Alabama. Michigan, TCU in the semifinal. Georgia, Ohio State in the other semifinal. USC and Tulane. And then also Utah and Penn State. And then this is the overall numbers. The total appearances, you can see Ohio State with 9, Alabama with 8, Clemson with 7, Oklahoma with 6, and Georgia also with 6. And then you kind of move down with Notre Dame with 4, Michigan with 4, Penn State with 4. FSU, they played in the first 3 years. They haven't been back since. Oregon's been there 3 times. Michigan State's been there 3 times. Washington's been there 3 times. And so has Baylor. And you can just take a look at the overall records. Alabama's played more games than Ohio State because, you know, they've played both the playoff games. Ohio State is 7-3. Bama is 9-4. Clemson is 6-4. Oklahoma is 2-4. Georgia is 5-2. And then you have Notre Dame at 0-4. Oregon at 2-2. Florida at 2-1. Penn State at 2-1. Wisconsin at 2-1. And Michigan State at 2-1. And then I just thought this was fun to look at the teams that have been there one time. You can see Kansas State, Tennessee, Tulane all going for the first time, but some other rare teams to go. Virginia, Memphis, Western Michigan, Stanford, Houston, Mississippi State, teams like that. So guys, that's just the complete history on the New Year's 6 bowl games. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.